Paula Garcia Tufro is from the Atlantic Council. She is Deputy Director of the Adrian Arsh Latin America Center. She's also served as Director for Development and Democracy at the U.S. National Security Council. Paula, thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
As Li-Ling just mentioned, deep divisions at the UNSC over this situation. What kind of influence could they really have in the situation in Venezuela?
I think what we saw today was, first of all, an internal debate within the National Security Council about whether this issue even belonged in the National Security Council. I think that decision came, obviously the meeting moved ahead and the decision was made that it was a topic that should move forward in that discussion. But I think we saw no real big surprises in terms of how countries aligned. I think the biggest news to come out of that meeting today was the first signs of a unified position on the part of the European Union and actually putting forward a concrete proposal and a call for the Maduro regime to actually call for elections within 8 days. And spoke forcefully and unitedly about the fact that if they did not call for free and fair elections within 8 days, they would in fact recognize interim President Guaido.
As you know, one of the big supporters of Guaido is the U.S. and President Trump. What kind of intervention could we see from the U.S. out of all this?
I think what we've seen very clearly and consistently has been this policy on gradual and ratcheting up of a economic sanctions regime. We've also seen a concerted effort on the diplomatic front, and I think we saw evidence of that today, and frankly, references to that diplomatic effort. And so the United States stood alongside most of Latin American countries, as well as European partners, and a strong contingent in the international community. I think in terms of new actions, I would expect continued sanctions regime, escalation of sanctions. There's been indications of that, and I would expect those to materialize over the coming days. And beyond that, I don't expect any military intervention. I know there's been talk of that. There's certainly concern of that. At this moment, I don't think it's in anyone's interest for there to be such an intervention, and I think cooler heads have prevailed, and despite the rhetoric and despite some of the public statements to date, I don't see that as an immediate possibility. But obviously, we're all very mindful of the fluid situation on the ground in Venezuela today, and frankly, waiting to see where the armed forces, what actions, if any, the armed forces take, and obviously what reactions that elicits from the international community.
Given Maduro has the support of the very powerful military in the country, is there any expectation that he would possibly step down? Is that at all possible?
So what we've seen to date is absolutely he's continued to maintain the bulk of the support, at least at the highest levels of the armed forces. We've seen public statements by the armed forces. And so whilst there have been some signs at the lower and mid levels of certainly people feeling the same suffering that the average Venezuelan is feeling on the humanitarian and economic front, in terms of whether he'll step down, I think if we were to see some dramatic cracks in that support from the armed forces, then that probably is the best chance that we would see a change in posture. I think the other element that could significantly change the current dynamics is whether there's a significant shift in terms of the financial support from other actors, other countries. Russia, China, and Turkey have been strong financial supporters. Turkey increasingly so. And so if that support were to go away or there to be a dramatic shift, then we could see a change in posture.
You mentioned the humanitarian crisis, the large humanitarian crisis there. We've seen the exodus of people from Venezuela to other neighboring countries. Is that likely to continue, speed up, or slow down as this situation evolves? I
think the saddest part about what's unfolding in Venezuela is that, yes, I do expect that will continue, and frankly, at an accelerated pace. To date, we've seen more than 3.3 million people fleeing Venezuela. We expect an additional 2 million to flee before the end of this year. And if the situation on the ground deteriorates further, I would expect that would only escalate.
Mm-hmm. One last question. I'm curious about the timing of Guaido's announcement. What do you make of that? Why now?
So the timing is driven by the Constitution, frankly. So January 10th marked an important date. The Venezuela held elections in May 20th of last year. January 10th represented the day in which Maduro or whoever got elected in those elections would actually assume that second term or that next term. So that triggered a series of actions. On January 5th, the new leadership of the National Assembly was due to be reelected. They were in fact elected and took up their new positions. And so you saw a sequence of events beginning in early January. From January 5th, then with the inauguration of Maduro January 10th. And so there was an expectation within the international community that there would be a series of actions to try to utilize that constitutional mark and framework to actually mobilize the Venezuelan people.
Be interesting to watch how this evolves. Paula Garcia Tufro with the Atlantic Council, thanks so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for your perspective.